The agenda had called for this meeting to begin immediately following the budget meeting, which began at 6. We wrapped there at 6:40. This is a recap for anyone watching on Cat TV. Because we then had the span of time to allow Cat TV to set up, we opened the meeting. The first order of business was a motion to amend the agenda, moving executive session to the first item. We did that. We're now back. So we're going to move on to public comments. So if anyone has public comments, the microphone's over there. If you could please just identify yourself by your name.
I will.
And that'd be great. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Carroll. I'm a selectman here in Bennington. Good evening, fellow board members. I want to first thank you for your efforts. As we well know, they often go unrewarded, except for here and here. And I want to express my gratitude to you for that. The reason I'm here before you tonight was approximately a year ago. I came to you folks to talk about permission slips and the difficulty that you had with parents not returning permission slips for dental examinations with students. And I inquired at the time if it could be done via email. And I'm sorry to say that I didn't get an answer from you folks. And I wonder if you could provide an answer this evening. Because right now, there was something on the PBS NewsHour tonight about a new treatment for little kids that is basically applied to the teeth. Mm-hmm. Did you see it?
No, but I know what you're talking about, ceilings.
And, you know, as you well know,
Painted.
we have a dental hygienist chair that I believe is manned almost every day, isn't that right?
Rather frequently.
We don't have one in Monument.
But how often are we getting kids in those chairs?
I don't know how.
It's only at one school.
Yeah, it's at only.
Right. But the central question, though, is have you adopted a new policy that will make it simpler so that we can fill those chairs via email or email permission slips, for lack of a better phrase?
We did bring this up last year.
We did.
It must be.
And-
Yes,
and
it was
one of
before
the-
March,
Yeah,
because I don't remember any of this.
Must have been
Yes.
pre-March.
Well, yes, it was.
So, but we're not really supposed to talk about that here.
So Jim, with the question and answers, and this has been a practice we've been trying to instill more firmly here, is the public comments are just those, they're comments, and it doesn't necessarily open it up for question and answer in this form. However, with that said, it's something that this board will take under advisement. The process, of course, is to send it up to the SBSU policy level and have it kind of filter down to all the places. I think what you say has some merit. It's not something this board can do anything about right now in this moment. But with that said, there are 4 members of this board now that weren't here when you addressed the board a year ago. So it's taken under advisement.
Is there a reasonable time with which I can
Again, keeping us to not doing question and answer, I'm not going to.
so there's no reasonable amount of time that I can expect an answer?
That's a question that I'm not going to answer right now.
Okay. All right, folks. Thanks very much for your time. Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is not a question or answer. This is just our policy is for if there is a question, for us to get back to the person through either the chair or the SV or the superintendent. So
Yes.
it isn't. We will be getting back to. We get back to anybody who asks a question in public, but just not at the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will answer your question about the reasonable time frame.
Yeah.
Just not.
And I don't want to be too heavy-handed about this, but this is really, it's about kids suffering, really. And the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are being spent in the emergency room. And these have all been backed up by Dr. Dundas and Sue from the free clinic. And it can be avoided, even if we just do simple examinations of these kids' teeth. And really, that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Jackie?
Thank
We don't have a policy.
In terms
dental
of permission
policy?
slips?
About not answering. about?
Sure,
Yes, you do.
absolutely.
Where is this
Absolutely.
policy?
It's, unfortunately, I'm unable to pull it up because that's what I'm trying to do is I'm tapping on the keys, but we covered this in a board meeting, 4 board meetings ago.
Well,
Can I
I think
make
it's
one
totally
comment?
unreasonable if you have an answer that you don't answer the public.
Can I make one comment? We did have an answer, and the answer was probably in the minutes, maybe of October not this past year, but the year before that one, after Jim came, because I was on the same dental commission that Jim's on. And the answer was that we would put it in the packet for newly enrolled students.
That's right.
But the problem was that that packet only goes to a child once. So unless you re-register for school, you don't get that notice. But it would be gradually implemented as the child went up in the grades. Now, what we can check on is if it is in the packet.
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet.
All right, but historically, I remember you telling me, Jack.
So Jim, so I appreciate it. The purpose for not having the public comment section become a question and answer period is because it undermines the open meeting law. The notion of the open meeting law is that we have an agenda set before the public that lets everyone know what's going to be discussed. So if it's a matter of importance, they can be sure to be here and participate. So to put something in question and answer that elicits a conversation and perhaps even some sort of action by the board, I think undermines that statute.
Okay.
As Dan said, I'm happy to get back to you. I want to take a look at what the existing policy says, which I can't do right now. It's not my intention to ignore it at all. It's just this is not the forum for
And it
it.
may
Okay.
become a future agenda item.
Sure, of course.
I just want
Of
to
course.
finish my point here. I was not asking Jackie
Okay.
a question. I was just making an accurate historical note here, and that is, thus far, or at the time that I came before you, the policy was that at the beginning of the school year, a piece of paper went home to parents, and by and large, they were not returned. And my suggestion was to simplify it, because I think 99% of the people who live in Bennington, if not greater, have an email address. And therefore, we could fill these dental hygienist chairs and get these kids' teeth at the very least examined. And my goal then as now is to simplify it and stop kids from suffering. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jim.
Any other public comments? Okay, so hearing.
Are comments generally after each
No.
item
No,
brought up?
so there's one opportunity at the beginning of a meeting for public comments. So there's not within the agenda of any given meeting, there's not an opportunity for any member of the public to speak after each agenda item. It's to, we choose to do it up front.
Okay.
To allow members of the public to speak. So certainly if you
Okay,
have.
so if I know that our agenda item is number 6, I still comment on it?
Yes, please, yes. Yeah, that
Okay.
would be the opportunity.
Sure. First timers.
If you could just please introduce yourself by your name, that'd be.
Sure.
Thank you.
Name's Michael Harrington. I have a student in the special needs program at Molly Stark, and I want to advocate for maintaining the 1-to-1 ratio of paras to students, definitely on the basis of the need, which was determined by evaluations prior to even entering school. Obviously, it's something that is reevaluated continually, depending on how the child progresses. Anyone in the public that feels that a 1-to-1 is way too steep for these kids, obviously doesn't know these kids. Some kids are developmentally disabled to the point where they do not have a sense of self-protection, prone to bolting, grabbing hot items, things of that nature. They may require the para to monitor them just for interactions with other students, other adults, to make sure that they're safe and appropriate. And I wanted to make sure that this is not just some overreaching, just overdoing it. There's some people in the public that feel that we're just overdoing it, and it's money that shouldn't be spent that way. I want to make sure it's known that it's a very, very important program that we keep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comments? We're always happy to see the first timer. Hopefully it won't be around. Well, that's good. So moving on to finance and treasurer's report. So that was forwarded by the treasurer earlier this week. Did everyone get a chance to see that? Any questions regarding the treasurer's report?
Make a motion, it's approved.
Thank you, George.
Second.
Thank you, Jordan Chail. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the treasurer's report, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, it's approved. Item number 3 is the consent agenda, which was attached. It includes the approval of 3 sets of board minutes, retirement of Donna Stone, who's in our audience, who often is in our audience. So could I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I have a change that needs to be made on the December 11th one. I was not present wherever Richard is.
Okay. So Richard, can you please?
Yeah, there's two. Hang on, December 11th. Got it.
Okay.
So can I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the modification to the minutes from December 11th?
So moved.
Thank you, George. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chair. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
I don't approve Donna retiring.
I do think it's important to take this opportunity, since she's retiring and since she's right here, to offer a strong voice of thank you to Donna for everything she's done for the students, for the school community, and also for her colleagues in the teachers union too. So you've been a strong voice for advocacy there as well. So it seems like every group you encounter, you help out. So thank you for your
Years
time.
did you teach?
God love you.
So thank you, Don. So that moves us on to agenda item 4, education matters, and we'll start with Principal Dunn. Yes?
Principals have limited or no reports that I had given them because of all their work on budgets, so we can, unless you have anything to add.
We just wanted to make sure if there were any reductions to the budget would be in the words that we contribute to our report.
Very good.
So the work on the budget was really their report for today.
And that's a ton of work done on the budget. For any of those who missed the budget report earlier, everyone has done a tremendous job in getting those numbers put together. And things are looking much better now than they did a month ago, which is great. So is there anything that any of the building principals would like to add?
3 years.
Hearing none, we're moving on to number 5, which is policies. So that's we need a motion to warn policy number 3200, and that's the policy governing emergency closings. There are 2 changes. It changes the word health problem to health risks, which I think is probably a more responsible way to approach things. And it also empowers the building principals with the responsibility of helping to develop the plan. So could I please have a motion to warn policy number 3200?
So moved.
Thank you, George. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Meredith. Any discussion on 3200? Hearing none, all those in favor of warning policy number 3200, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. So that puts us on to item number 6, which is the special education presentation, specifically the use of one-to-one paraeducators. And Ms. Farn, before we have you start, the idea behind having this be a presentation really stemmed from some comments made by the Secretary of Education, Rebecca Holbrook, who noted at the Vermont School Boards Association annual meeting words to the effect that schools ought not to be using one-on-one paraeducators. And so we realized that as a board, we didn't have a firm hand on our district's use of paras, and so we wanted to bring Ms. Warren on board. So with that said, the floor is yours.
Hi. Good evening. So I did prepare a short presentation. I'll have you guys might have some questions that I'm not aware that you wanted me to answer tonight. I can answer those. I can try to do my best to answer them tonight, and I can always come back to another board meeting to answer additional questions that you may have. So the first thing that I prepared, this is a worksheet. This worksheet is actually a worksheet that we reinvented. It was in place a number of years ago where each IEP team would come together, and when a student was being.
No acronyms.
Sorry, no acronym. Each individualized education plan team would come together, and when a student was being considered for a one-to-one paraprofessional, they would complete this worksheet. This worksheet really talks about the level of independence, and that's what's key to determining whether a student, how much service that a student needs with a paraprofessional. For the most part, what determines what services a child is going to get is when a child goes through the evaluation and eligibility process for education, for special education. Once that determination is made, we know the areas that a student needs work in or services in specialized educational services. From that, we decide at the individualized education plan team meeting, when we write that document, which is a legal document of what services are going to happen, and we have to determine where that student is eligible to be independent. And if you look at this document, on the front side, it really starts with an information about what is independence. And that's where this starts. We have to determine where a child is independent because that is our goal. Our goal from the time that a child starts in special education until they graduate is to make them as independent as possible. I know you've heard this at a number of meetings. I've talked about this a lot when I've spoken with you. We want our children to be as independent in the community as they possibly can. Special education does not mean that they can't be in our community independently. They can't work. They can't, hold, important places in society. That's what our job is to help them determine how to do. So one of the concerns I heard, I tried to listen to the last board meeting on Cat TV to see what some of the concerns you had were. It seemed like some of the questions stemming from Dr. Holcomb's sentence or her information was, then what is the understanding of what a one-to-one paraprofessional is and what does a one-to-one paraprofessional do? There's a number of categories. One-to-one paraprofessionals work with students on their service needs or on what areas they need their goals to be in. Some students have goals for safety. Some students have goals for feeding. Some students have goals for academics. Those paraprofessionals don't do direct instruction. And I think if you've ever read any of the Michael Greco information about paraprofessionals, he does a lot of this definition work for us. He defines what paraprofessionals shouldn't be doing. What paraprofessionals should not be doing is taking a child and taking them away from the general education instruction to instruct them. That's not what they should be doing. They should be working within that environment to support them. And that's where our training comes in with the special education teachers, that we want one-to-one paraprofessionals, small group paraprofessionals, just classroom paraprofessionals, having those students included. Their job is not to instruct. One of the things we term it as like micro exclusionary practices, where the student goes into the general education classroom, but they're not really included in that instruction. They're just sitting in the back of the room, and we don't want to see that. Whenever we walk around and we see that, we talk to those paraprofessionals, we talk to those general education teachers and say, no, that child needs to be sitting in the instruction and learning, and that paraprofessional supports that learning. That's what they do. We also don't want to see paraprofessionals just sitting there not helping the students. So one of the things that I think tends to happen when we talk about paraprofessionals is, oh, give them more training, give them more training, give them more training. It's very difficult to say, oh, we're just going to send you to this conference and we'll have you come sit here in this room and listen to this person all day. We really want to move to embedded training, because embedded training is where they learn the most information. So what I mean by that is that we're going to have the special education teacher giving instruction to that student and that paraprofessional on what they need to be doing. For example, if it's a student that we're working with reading on, that special education teacher or that general education teacher may be working directly on that student with syllable sounds or phonic sounds or the decoding piece of it. And then they may step back to work with another student or another group of students while that paraprofessional helps that student practice. And again, that's what we want to see. the special education teacher or the general education teacher doesn't have to stand right beside that student to help them practice that sound, because that paraprofessional has been taught how to help that student practice the sound. So I get very worried when I hear statements like that we're just going to get rid of one-to-one paraprofessionals because we shouldn't be using those. You have to go things on an individual basis. You have to really look at what a student's needs are. We don't have a lot of one-to-one paraprofessionals. I think BSD has 10, not including the New England Center for Children program, and that may sound like a lot, but when you think about it, these are our students with some of our most needs. Students with safety needs, feeding needs, mobility needs. So we consider that all the time. And this paraprofessional worksheet is not only used when you first determine, but it's also used to help the student get off of having a one-to-one paraprofessional. Again, we go back to that word independence. We want our students to be more independent. So we go through at the annual individualized education plan team meeting where we talk about and say, where has Wendy become more independent? Well, she's more independent when she's reading now. So she doesn't need that paraprofessional support in that reading time. So there's another chunk of time where we're making Wendy independent. So we always review that piece of it. I just want to make sure I covered my notes. Do you guys have any questions while I'm... Yes, sir.
How often is that reassessed? How often is the need for one-to-ones reassessed?
Yearly with the annual... Can I say IEP?
Once you explain it.
Okay. Yearly with the annual IEP meeting, because you have to have an annual IEP meeting one time every year. So at least yearly. Sometimes we have students who are really progressing, and it may happen with some kind of behavior or some kind of new intervention that's been introduced, that we need to come back because the student is really progressing, and that one-to-one paraprofessional is, backing up and backing up and backing up. And we don't want that student to have somebody kind of standing over their shoulder.
Sure.
We're always asking ourselves, when can we step back? When can we step back? And we even have a number of one-to-one paraprofessionals that we've talked to a lot and said, okay, when you see a time that little Wendy's doing great, step back. Let Wendy participate in that activity. Take data and say, how did Wendy do? Bring that data back, and then that gets considered. It's really important data, and that's one of the things that we do a lot of this kind of out-of-the-box training on with those one-to-one paraprofessionals is how to take good data, because that is important information when those students do get that annual review. One of the things I did want to say is, we don't leave paraprofessionals to their own and say, oh, figure out how to do this. There's constant support from the special education teacher and the general education teacher, from the associate directors of special education. I do a lot of training and get them to ask me questions like, what should I do in this situation, or how should we handle this? How do we talk to this teacher, or how do we talk to this child? We do a lot of that because we want our paraprofessionals who are wonderful, with our students, to become more educated on the education way of doing things. So we do a lot of information and letting them ask questions about situations. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
When a paraprofessional is assigned to one student, is it prohibited that they don't help the other students around that student, so that student doesn't feel like they're isolated?
No. So we don't say, okay, you're assigned to little Wendy, and little Wendy's doing fine. Make sure that you don't ever speak to anybody else. You just stay right over little Wendy's shoulder. One of the things, like I was saying, one of the things that we really try to help our one-to-one paraprofessionals do is make some general observations of when Wendy is doing well, and how can the paraprofessional step back from Wendy to help create independence. I'll use the example that was given in the public comments. When you have a student who is possibly a bolter, or a student who's dangerous with running, Now, that's a paraprofessional who we would not say, oh, little Wendy's over there, how about you go and stand by the door? It's about proximity too. We need to teach that. Do we want the paraprofessional standing over little Wendy's shoulder? No. We want the paraprofessional to give Wendy some independence and help Wendy understand that when you're being safe with your body, these are some of the advantages that happen. So it's about teaching strategies, and that happens with the general education teacher, the special education teacher, and the paraprofessional who reinforces those strategies to support that independent growth. So no, to answer your question, they are not just absolutely no, you can't work with anybody else. If little John walks by while you're helping Wendy and says, where's the bathroom? You can't speak to them. We don't say that.
But they don't help the other kids around them.
No,
They do.
They do. But they're not going to just leave their child and say,
No, I meant
oh, I'm going to go to the other room.
I meant work in a group.
Yeah, that might be one of the goals. That's one of the great things about that. A child's goal may be that they work in a group. So the one-to-one paraprofessional works with the general education or the special education teacher to make a group, because that's the child's goal. And that builds independence. Even though the one-to-one paraprofessional is there, it's building independence, because now we're working in a group setting. And now we get to talk about how the social pieces happen in that group setting.
Because that's what Secretary Holcomb was talking about. She said, and Jackie, you can attest to this, she said that no student should be serviced by a one-to-one paraprofessional. But she also said that students who need individual help should be serviced within a group of peers.
Absolutely.
Because
By a teacher.
by a teacher.
And I don't necessarily agree that it has to be by a teacher. My example of working on the sounds. After I've gotten my direct instruction in Apple, the special education teacher doesn't have to sit with little Michael and say, okay, let's do Apple again.
But we often pull out our students from the classroom, general education, for specials, and they miss, because it's not aligned with the schedule of the school, unless the schools have changed radically this year. Little Wendy may be pulled out for reading and her teaching math. Wendy might be all right in math. When she comes back into the classroom, she's not being instructed in math. The paraeducator's instructing her in math.
I'm going to disagree with that a little, because we try not to pull out of the English, or the literacy, the math. We try not to pull out for special education services during those times. And I agree with you that the schedule is very difficult, because it's not aligned. You don't just have first and second grade working together and third and fourth grade working together on literacy. So there is some conflict, but we really try not to pull out of those the literacy and the math times, because we try to consider those protected times. What we again try to do with the scheduling is make sure that instructional time is there with a general education teacher, and if we have to pull a child out of math to do literacy instruction because of the scheduling, we don't pull out of that first instruction time where I'm going to just do like a typical thing. The teacher goes to the board and says, this is how you do 1 + 1 and that kind of thing. We try to pull it out of that practice time where that can be reinforced. And what we try to do is align. If we're pulling out of math, we're specialized instruction in math. If we're pulling out of reading or literacy, we're specialized instruction in reading. And it's not the paraprofessional that's pulling them out. And,
No, I know.
Yeah, and then the paraprofessional, when they come back in, the teacher may actually give some instruction, the special education teacher may give some instruction on, this is what you're going back into, this is what you've missed, and this is how you're going to practice it. Again, I agree, scheduling is very difficult. I would love to find a magic wand to fix scheduling, but until that time, we definitely try to make sure that we're aligning the special education services as much as possible with those general education pieces. It's not going to happen with every child.
We didn't bring this up because we felt that students that were developmentally disabled that have real strong deficits physically or mentally shouldn't have one-to-ones. We brought this up because we felt it was important to bring forth what we had learned at Lake Maury and, say, you know, to let the board know what, the Deputy Secretary of Education, whatever her name was, and Rebecca Holcomb, the Secretary of Ed, was saying up there. If we're using them properly, we're using them properly. But last year, in this building alone, we were taking paraeducators who were supposed to be serving students, and they were being substitutes for the day.
I can't speak to that. I don't know how systems work, but I do know that we try very hard to make sure that our services are staying consistent. Substitutes are a problem within, I think, every school in RSU. I remember that from the high school when I used to be there. We do try to use, you know, when teachers have prep time and that kind of prep time or I guess collaboration time, if we can utilize, you know, teachers to do that. I know we try to do that too. But so, you know, point well taken. I think that we have a system. I want to brag on the supervisory union a little. We have a system have valued our paraprofessionals a great deal, which I think because we value them so much, we've put a lot of training and information into those paraprofessionals, so they have a high degree of competency, and we're constantly, you know, asking ourselves, how can we make this better? And I'll be honest, they ask that. I have a para leadership team that meets regularly, and they ask, how can we do things better? How can we do things differently? How can we support the teachers differently? So I think it's a good conversation to have, and a good ongoing conversation, especially as we really work on the, you know, multi-tiered systems of support and how that plays out. And I know that plays a major role in Dr. Holcomb's, you know, idea of how education works in Vermont. So, you know, as that evolves and as that changes, the paraprofessional role will evolve and change.
One of the things she mentioned, if I can remember it now, was that, the social emotional well-being of the child, when they're assigned a one-to-one, this is her words, that the child wasn't really being allowed to grow because they weren't interacting with their peers. And the peers weren't getting really a chance to understand how Joey or Johnny or whatever was, why they are the way they are, you know? You know, there are differences there, you know, and there's real reasons for their differences, you know.
And I can say that's something that's always been a part of conversations, and that's why, honestly, we go back to these worksheets and say, now where is little Johnny more independent? Because you're right, that can happen. Children can become too dependent on that person to make the right choices for them, to always be there to remind them to bring their book home, to always, you know, make sure that they put their coat on. We don't want that. Again, it goes back to independence and how can we foster independence for students. So we do have those conversations, and we do ask paraprofessionals, don't do everything for a student. You know, make sure that you're working with a special education teacher and the general education teacher to practice that strategy. So when little Johnny gets, you kind of notice that little Johnny's getting antsy and he's looking towards the door, that you remember that you walk over to the door and you're standing there and you're like, let's sit down. You know, so those reminders to help those students foster their independence and make a change, because we want them to kind of move past that piece of it. And there may be students within our supervisory union who will always have a one-to-one paraprofessional because of their medical or mobility needs or behavioral needs. And that's okay, because we're looking towards what kind of things that we're going to do to set them up to go to the next phase of their life.
I have a concern about your autism program, the one-to-ones there, that basically New England tells us that we have to have. Because when they go to the high school, I know a person in the ASD program, they don't have one-to-ones. They have 2 or 3 aides in the room, but they don't have one-to-ones.
So this is a continuum. It's the perfect example of how a continuum works well. In the New England Center for Children program, which I hope I can refer to as NECC from now on, that program really trains their paraprofessionals in there of how to foster that independence. And those students actually probably have more access to general education classes, to classes than some other students who don't even have one-to-ones, who are in a variety of special education services. Because New England Center for Children NEC really pushes the idea that they're going to be in the general education environment. We have students who are in the general education environment and participating in the general education environment 90 to 100% of their time because those paraprofessionals are supporting them in there. And what we do is we have a continuum. You do this much, you do this much, you do this much, you do this much, and you start to gain independence, and those paraprofessionals will pull back. And our goal is, by the time a child is reaching the high school, because we're seeing it in the middle school already, they've had several years of NEC in the elementary level. We only have 1 classroom of NEC in the middle school. We have a larger ASD, so we've transitioned several students from NEC in the middle school to the ASD program in the middle school. And we're hoping to do that again at the high school level. Some of it comes with some maturity too. We're going to foster that. And we've had students who, before NEC came to us, were students with autism who had one-to-one paraprofessionals with them, same kind of thing as you would have with a NEC. And we may have that at the high school again. The group we have at the high school right now have either not been through NEC or are at the level that they've moved on to a level of independence where a small group paraprofessional is supporting them. And some of them may be in the autism room, we call it Oaks at the high school, the autism room at the high school all day, or just a small portion of their day because of their level of independence. And we always continue to want them to move up that continuum of independence. So I think to answer your question, it's about a level of continuum of services. When many students come into the NEC program at the elementary level, we're working on some of the basic fundamentals: safety, being able to sit into a classroom, being able to understand some of the information that's coming in and how you assimilate that, how you talk to teachers. So some of those basic safety things. As they move up, we hope that they're going to have more independence. They're kind of going to grow into going into the general education classrooms more independently. We can possibly move them into the autism room at the middle school. And then as we move to the high school, move them into the Oaks classroom with small group pair support, or even a one-to-one pair, just not the same level of intensity as New England has. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy.
Any other questions, Ms. Warren? So please let me know if I have this correct. So the takeaway is that one-on-ones are not providing direct instruction to students. One-on-ones are used to help support practice and to help support safety with students. That there's an ongoing process for assessing whether or not one-on-one is necessary. And that although the use of one-on-ones could go very wrong, it sounds like we're doing it very right.
I would think that was a great takeaway. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So moving on is the superintendent's reports. Superintendent Culkeen.
Good evening. So I'm going to pass out a memorandum of agreement. If you're on any of the other boards, you've probably seen this. This is the last board that I'm bringing it to. It's to correct an oversight from the ESP negotiations. What this refers to is one thing that had been agreed on, and we went back and looked in the minutes of last May. It was agreed that all paraeducators local paraeducators would become employees of the SVSU, as all special ed paraeducators are SVSU. So this will help and both sides agreed to this, but when we gave the update to boards about we gave you a sheet on what had been agreed on to contract changes, this got left out of it. And when it came to light was in the beginning of budget season, and Renee put the SU budget together and showed the large increase in the line item for paraeducators, and there's a decrease in all the local budgets for paraeducators, all that got shifted there. And a couple of board members said, we didn't know anything about that. And that's when we went back and looked and saw that it was not in the synopsis of what the agreement changes were, but the minutes show, thanks to Richard, the minutes show that it was agreed by both sides. So what I need is the board to authorize the chair to sign this memorandum of understanding. I have the original, and then it'll be presented to the association for them to sign it. This was recommendation of our attorney that even though the minutes show was agreed upon, we should be clear that everybody knows what is in it when we vote on it.
So with that, I would entertain a motion to empower the chair to do exactly as Jim just described.
So moved.
We have the chair this time, second by George. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
And the only other thing I do, the chair had requested that I share this, because he got the copy of the results too. You know that we did have the water tested for lead here at Bennington Elementary School, and we did get the results back, and that all the taps sampled had results below the Environmental Protection Agency action level for public drinking water, which their action level would be 15 parts per billion. So it's below that, and they do give us, and to Jerry's proves, some examples of how we can, no water supply is ever lead-free, because there is, but it's below the actionable levels. So things like, flushing faucets before use first thing in the morning, because of, particularly in an aged building, there is lead in the solder that are in those joints. So that's good news, and that's the only two items I have for you tonight.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the chair report. Just a couple housekeeping items. The Act 46 response, the Section 9 response, was filed with AOE on time. So that has happened. Again, what looks to be the budget that we'll be voting on later on in the month looks far better than it did last month. So that was a source of some anxiety for quite a few people all around this table. Bless you. So that is improving. And I want to take this opportunity, thank you, to just comment on, it came up, so it's policy 7300, which is public participation at board meetings.
I read it.
And I know, well, that's good, I'm going to tell everyone else. That it does seem as though the board, particularly the chair, is being obstinate or defiant, and we have people who are coming out, particularly on a cold evening, although it's rather warm comparatively tonight. We have folks coming out to participate in the meetings, and they feel like they're getting stonewalled by the board. I felt like I was stonewalling you, and I felt terrible because what you raise is a great notion. Specifically,
I didn't feel that way at all.
Thank you. Specifically, policy 7300 says, I'll read it out loud. If questions are directed by the public to the school board or prudential committee on topics that have not been posted as agenda items, answers shall be deferred pending consideration by the full school board or prudential committee and respective district and supervisory union administrators in a timely manner. If timely manner is defined somewhere, I don't have that in front of me at the moment. However, the comments were taken under advisement. I'll be doing some educating of myself, and as Dan pointed out, you may well find it as an agenda item upcoming. So that's all I have for my chair report. So agenda item 9, FYI, the student enrollment numbers for December, the budget status report, and the Chelsea Solar Project report are all available on the website. So that's the FYI. And that concludes our agenda for the evening, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, George. A second? Thank you, Meredith. All those in favor, any discussion? No. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Meeting closed. Have a good day.